Okay, this one took me a while. I learned quite a bit. So first I want to go over what we've done here now is created a .env file. What this allows me to do is it allows me, instead of exporting values in capital letters in the specific environment in my terminal, I've put them in a file. So as you can see, for example, in main, I have called each of these with the OS module. So the API key, the API secret, and the Sheety token. There are six in total. The API key and secret from the flight API, the Sheety token API, and then the Tequila API used for sending SMS files. So I'm going to go over each of the classes first so you get an idea of how the APIs work. So this first API is the data manager. So what this does is, as we did in similar practice before, it's using the Sheety API, which generates an endpoint when you give it permission to for a specific sheet. And then you set a type of token. For here I've used the auth bearer token, and this is the Sheety token being pulled from that's going to be passed in main to this class. So then we have 3 methods that I've created. One is just to fetch all of the data in the sheet. It uses the get method, and then it uses the URL for retrieving rows, because there's a different endpoint for retrieving and updating, and you have to actually manually enable those in the Sheety API. Then what we do is we handle if there's a 200 response or an error, and we return the prices because the format of each row is that it's a dictionary of rows in the prices tab, because you can have different tabs in each sheet. I don't know if I'm saying that right, but basically in one sheet you can have multiple sheets, and for now we just want the stuff in price. So once that gets initialized, we also have 2 other methods fetching just the cities, because one of the asks were to basically find the closest airport based off of the city name, and we've done that. The 2 NAs, for some reason it can't find a close airport to Tokyo or Hong Kong. That's okay, that's a bug for another day. The other piece that we've done here is basically created the payload for retrieving the data in a different structure. So we've basically grouped them by cities instead of prices, and we've created, this is the city, this is the code, and this is the lowest price and the ID, and then it returns cities, just restructuring that. The other 2 methods we have here are add rows. If you want to add a row, say you have a new city that you want to visit, you can use the method add rows to add that to the row, to the sheet. And then update rows. So this is the method that we will call to update the IATA code, basically the airport code. What it does is it takes the endpoint, but the only thing that changes for this API is /city in the endpoint. There's a lot of print statements here so that you can see where it's being called as we go through. Next one I'm going to go through is the flight data. I ended up not using it. And the other one I want to show you is flight search. This one was interesting. So this is there are 2 different APIs that we use for the, I don't know if I'm saying this, Amadeus test API. Essentially, it requires a key and a secret. And once you create an authentication token with that endpoint, these are two curl examples that I used from the documentation to kind of give you an idea of the structure. Basically, we're passing content type, and then the parameters being passed with the URL are the client ID and the client secret, and then it returns a token. So this is the basically authenticating, say, hey, authenticate my session. Here's my headers, here are my data, here's the request that I pass, and then it will give me the code and response text. If it's successful, it will print out the token. This is not secure. Do not do this at home since we're just testing. This is okay. And then it'll return it. There's also a method called get flight. So this is another endpoint, right, where we're searching flight offers. First, we need to authenticate with the token, and then we need to pass the payload. So this API endpoint is expecting something like the origin, so the flight where you're starting from, or the airport you're starting from, the destination that you're going to, and then the departure date, how many adults, and then it puts the max price that you want as a string and a currency. And we only want five, so technically we want the cheapest, but hey, 5 options are great. We will change that later. Probably want to change that to 2 for now, so that we can lower the amount of calls that we're doing so we don't run out during this demo. The other authentication header for this endpoint, then we also do a pass with that information saying, hey, we want flights from here to here on this day, what can you give me? And then it will return a boatload of data in JSON format. Okay, there are 2 other messages here, methods, not messages, where we can find flights within the budget and basically pass where we're going from, the max price, and the travel date. So each day you can run this and say, hey, today is there a better price than the one I have found? And then it loops through and says, yes, here's the flight. And then get destination code. This was what we used to fill in the city. This is another endpoint for the API that you can use to say, hey, here's the city. Please send me 2 or 3 closest airports to this city and the code for them. And this is the This is the locations endpoint for the API. It expects a city parameter, a keyword, a subtype, and what kind of view that you want. Then we have, okay, just take the first one and then say, hey, we found this airport code, or we didn't find this airport code. This is probably not necessary unless you're debugging, but since we like more verbose for practice, that's what we used. And then finally, we've seen this before. This is a Twilio API. I am using WhatsApp instead of the SMS. Basically, you need an account ID and an authentication token. And I've called this class notification manager, and it has one method to send a message to yourself based off of the message that you want to pass. Okay, now moving over to our main. We've imported all of our classes at the top. We've used datetime, we used OS to get our environmental variables, and we have started to initialize and create the data manager and the flight search. So we try each of these. We first gather all of the cities. We go through each city and we make sure that the code for the airport is updated correctly. Just in case we said, hey, I'm just gonna go manually in here and say, I wanna go to, how about I want to go to San Jose, right? And I want it to be less than $100 from SFO. I don't know if you can go to SFO from San Francisco, but if it does, then that'll get filled in when we test it. Okay, and then once it does that, we've manually hard-coded the SFO flight origin. We've taken the format of today's date, and then we pass it in and say, hey, today are the prices any better? It takes the get the code, get the lowest price. This is for fetching the data from the sheet, and then from with that data, if it's missing, add the city. And then we are going to go through each of the destination flights under the max price. And then it says, okay, we're gonna loop through the first row and say, all right, are there flights within my budget? Within the flight search, use the method find flights within my budget. Pass these into the parameters that we set up in the class to use request parameters for the origin of the city, the destination, the max price, and today's date. And then initialize our notification manager, because if we find something, we want it to text us or WhatsApp us. So it'll print this, hey, I found flights within the city. This is just for debugging. I only want to be alerted when I get something. So the notification manager will only send me, say, hey, there's a deal. This is just for our monitoring script. And then it prints out the best price. They also say, hey, if I didn't find a better price than what's in there, then that's the result. So let's print that out. I'll show you how that works. Now Twilio will fail because I did not create the correct Python interpreter, 3.11. I'm using 3.13. So you can see I am trying to use this one. Main. And I'm failing. Okay, I see what happened here. Because I don't have the right interpreter for Twilio, the client class is not going to work. So let's do it without it, just so you can see how it works. Okay. Here's another error. Cities is not defined. I might have ran out of tokens today. So here's what I'm gonna do. I did run out of tokens because of all the debugging we did. Let me show you the back scroll. So essentially what it does is that it goes through, it creates an authentication token. It looks for the correct IATA code for each of these. It inserts it into the sheet, and then it uses the update to say, hey, here is the new IOTA code, IST, NIC, Denver, London. And then it loops through each of those and searches for flights that are less than the max price that's in the sheet. We did not find flights to Paris for $54 or to Frankfurt for $42. And it errors out on the IOTA codes that are set to NA. So we really should be skipping those. Another bug we can fix for later. It probably would be pretty cool if I didn't have the original code from the London prices that the instructor uses, because when you're in the Western Hemisphere, it is certainly way more expensive than $95 to get to Paris.